Greetings to all. I acknowledge the Vice Chancellor and our guests, specifically Professor Nkwana, who will be our keynote speaker today. I woke up early this morning to reflect on what my take will be on this introductory slot. Although I'm mindful that I'm not the guest speaker today, I need to set the stage and tone for our lecture today. The theme of the lecture focuses on the Africanization of the curriculum. And I hope our guest will do justice to the theme, and the input by our acting VC will also shed more light on what we will be dealing with today. By way of reflection, I thought about what I was taught at school and how it socialized me as far as understanding curriculum issues are concerned. I have first-hand experience of a colonized curriculum, and I can confidently say I didn't read about it from a book or know theories about it. When I did curriculum studies at university, my professor taught me about the hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum is a concept which was touted by Philip W. Jackson. The phrase hidden curriculum argues that we need to understand education as a socialization process. And some understand the hidden curriculum as a concept that describes the often unarticulated and unacknowledged things that students are taught at school or university. Some say the hidden curriculum entails unintended lessons which are learned in the course of learning. I would like to differ partially with this view, because for us, in Africa specifically, the colonizers' hidden curriculum was not hidden. Reflecting on this, I understand exactly why we were taught some subjects at school. We were taught agriculture, and we were also taught gardening. And while we were doing these subjects, girls at school were taught what was called housecraft and later called home economics. We were being prepared to serve a particular cause and a particular sector of the South African population without being empowered to be independent or to be independent thinkers per se. We were being prepared to work in their gardens, and we were being prepared to work in their kitchens. Later, in high school, woodwork was made part of the curriculum or of the core curriculum for all boys. The hidden spirit of the curriculum was servitude. In time, the hidden curriculum becomes more complex and overt, became more complex and overt as we transited to university. The system, as we called it then, deployed white male professors in almost all black universities, whose mission was not primarily to teach, but to ensure that we did not excel and succeed in particular fields. Sadly, there were also black academics who were planted in our institution to serve the same particular cause. Such tendencies have not been completely uprooted. They exist and are complexly nuanced in the mindsets and tendencies in our curriculum. That is why we continue to have conversations and engagements that talk about how can we continue to think about our curriculum away from the original intentions of the colonizers. It is my pleasure to introduce first our acting Vice Chancellor, Professor Ramukhale, who had a very intelligent piece that he did, which was published in the Mail and Guardian, on the decolonization of our curriculum. I'll hand over to Prof to take over this slot, and later he will then be followed by our keynote speaker. Thank you.
As Dr. Makua has just said, in the next few minutes, I'm going to contextualize the discourse on the decolonization of the curriculum by grounding it within an educational theory, which comes from the discipline of didactics. The subject of this lecture is also of significance to our youth, especially during Youth Month, at a time when unemployment has gone rampant, even among those who hold university qualifications. Not surprisingly, this period has also seen the resurgence of xenophobia and Afrophobia in its many forms. When economic opportunities shrink, the struggle for resources often turns into hate and scapegoating. With or without economic opportunities, the value of education cannot be undermined. It was former President Nelson Mandela who once said, and I quote, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world," end of quote. In South Africa and the rest of the African continent, education is also the only viable ticket out of poverty. Education holds the key to the doors of prosperity. But we must also recognize that our educational system is part of the legacy of our colonial and apartheid past, where education was designed to entrench unequal power relations and privileges for a white minority population. As such, there has been sufficient consensus on the need to decolonize our education as part of a broad plan to strengthen our educational system and indirectly our society and economy. While there is general agreement on the need to decolonize, the debate on how to decolonize knowledge and the curriculum has been fierce and contentious. I suspect this is because for many of us, this project is about knowledge redress, and we have assumed the roles of activists against cultural and knowledge imperialism. I will now attempt to explain how perspectives from didactics can help us decolonize the curriculum effectively. Didactics, also known as the science of teaching, recognizes that if teaching and learning is to be successful, certain universal conditions must be met. These universal requirements are known as didactic principles. Of the several principles recognized in didactic theory, there are three which are of special significance and relevance to the decolonization of the curriculum. I will start with the first principle, which urges that all teaching must start from the known to the unknown. In didactic theory, it is universally accepted that for a learner to acquire new knowledge, the new knowledge must form a link with the knowledge and experiences the learner already possesses. If the new knowledge relates to the learner's experiences, then the learner will find the new knowledge meaningful and will therefore acquire it with ease and enjoyment. If new facts are not connected to the learner's existing knowledge, the result is likely to be boredom, alienation, and poor motivation. In other words, that learner would be lost forever. In South Africa, colonial education violated this principle of proceeding from the known to the unknown by foregrounding and venerating European culture, which was the unknown, at the expense of the learner's African culture, which is the known. Universities inherited this legacy, and this explains why even 28 years after the birth of what democratic South Africa, young people complain of cultural imperialism. As we decolonize the curriculum, it is important to remember this continuity imperative, for there is always a temptation in a decolonization project to stay with the known for reasons that have no bearing on effective teaching and learning, but are more connected with chauvinism and cultural pride. Starting with the known and proceeding to the unknown is inherently progressive because it recognizes that while what is familiar is meaningful, a true end of empowering education is mastery of the unfamiliar. In this epoch, where life in the global village has become an inescapable reality, thanks to the rapid technological advances that we confront on a daily basis, the need to proceed from the known to the unknown, from the local to the global, has become a priority. We must, if we hope to teach for global relevance, decolonize knowledge to enable students to progress from the known to the unknown. The second principle I want to talk about refers to the need to proceed from the simple to the complex when teaching. Teaching that commences with the known does not only make learning interesting and memorable, but also makes it easy and manageable. For what is familiar is usually simple to grasp. But when a teacher proceeds to the unknown, an element of complexity is introduced, and mastery of complexity is a key objective of worthwhile teaching and learning. Such mastery is made possible by the foundation that the teacher would have created by having started with the known and simple. Again, this principle demonstrates the value of the knowledge students bring with them to the classroom. Rather than discard this knowledge, this didactic principle advocates that we must build on it as a point of departure, and as we continue to the domain of the complex. It is using this principle effectively that has given countries in Asia a significant advantage in subjects such as mathematics. The final principle that I want to refer to is the principle of totality, which others call the global principle or the principle of integration. When decolonizing the curriculum, we must remember the unity of human knowledge. Although each person is a member of a family, a clan, or even a nation, on a higher plane, each one of us is a member of a single human race, integrated into the whole by virtue of one's humanness, confronted with similar human problems on account of being an organic member of the human species, and faced with the peculiarities of the same human condition. Decolonized knowledge must therefore be integrated with the totality of human knowledge. This should be easy to achieve if there is acceptance of the need to progress from the known to the unknown, from the simple to the complex, and from the local to the global. In this regard, it is important to locate decolonizing the curriculum within the broader framework of creating a unity of human knowledge that is universally representative. I want to conclude with a lesson from applying didactic principles to decolonizing the curriculum. What applying didactic principles teaches us is that we must not decolonize the curriculum with the intention of basking in the glory of African culture and historical achievements, but with the purpose of employing the known, the simple, and the local as a springboard for engagement with the unknown, the complex, and the global on a higher international plane. For world citizenship is now unavoidable. Implemented this way, the principle of decolonization of the curriculum will truly advance our quest for developing knowledge that is truly representative of all our globalized and networked world. Thank you very much. This is the context, the context for decolonizing the curriculum, grounded within the educational theory that comes from didactics. I hope this talking notes will have provided sufficient impetus for Professor Nkwana to then present his lecture.
Thank you, Prof. Ramkhale, for setting the parameters and also setting the framework. I think that will couch my talk nicely within the framework that you have just said. I'll just provide a slight, synopsis of my talk to say this intellectual piece that I want to amplify and then share with the audience is about Africanization of the curriculum. I struggled to come up with a very tight, nice, pithy kind of a title. Then I end up talking about Africanization of the curriculum as celebrated or celebration of Africanness. And the aim of this piece starts with the argument that African forms of knowing are grounded in the geo-social political fabric of African people. And African forms of knowledge construction map out the humanity from the African epistemic, the episteme perspective, which influence what is worth knowing and how we make sense of knowledge system. So Africanization of the curriculum is intended, its intent is to trouble the discourses and the formats of dominion. These formats I'm referring to: colonization, imperialism, apartheid, neo-colonialism, marginalization, subjugation, disenfranchisement. And all these were made because people were pushing and then marginalizing other ways of knowing. And these other ways of knowing were referred to as very unscientific, pathetic, appalling, puzzling, and then subjected to global north epistemic devices. Inequities created by the dominant discourses in the corpus of pyramids of knowledge systems dictates for the call of Africanization of the curriculum in the knowledge systems or the pyramids of knowledge. And we acknowledge that there are variances, the pieces, variances in the knowledge systems. And then this intellectual piece of this talk is about challenges. How then do we begin to challenge hegemony in any form, size, shape in the pyramids of knowing? hegemony over other forms of knowing. Its boundaries could be ruptured in pursuance of equity, justice, and forms of knowing. So we are talking about Africanization. Other people will be talking about decolonization. Others will be referring to it as Afrosense. Others, they said, let us not call it decolonization because we are treating it as if it is an event, but rather refer to it as decoloniality. Let me introduce my piece of the talk, which is informed by two theories or lenses that I'm wearing. The first lens that I'm going to wear is the post-colonial theory lens. And the other lens that I'm going to wear is the decoloniality lens. These lenses, this theoretical perspective and lenses, enables me to begin to trouble the discursive spaces in the corpus of knowing and the post-colonial theories, which give us a lens towards dismantling the dominion in the body of knowledge, and then striking for balance in the pendulum of knowledge systems. This lecture is about challenging discourses around intellectual colonization that we have naturally embraced for many centuries. And then some of these traditions and theoretical norms that we're using, whose foundations are frame and then boundage of alien global north episteme. Let me use some anecdotes. The first anecdote is that I'm asking a question to say why Africans are still referring to fried potatoes as French fries, while these are planted and prepared in Africa. The second anecdote that I want to use is before the conceptualization of the letter alpha and beta, which later coined, the word alphabet was coined. Before the Latin word scholar was invented, Africa was the first to invent or institute schools, systems, and also universities. Africans have been there. They have been theorizing, they have been philosophizing, they have been reading and then providing sophisticated writing skills and sophisticated mathematical manipulation. Many universities existed and then predate other universities in Europe, and they existed in the pre-colonial era. I can make mention of the Timbuktu University. I can make mention of the Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the Great University of Alexandria in what is used to be called the Northern Sahel. And the other anecdote that I want to make is, I'm beginning to ask questions to say, if Africans were not that sophisticated, how then do we explain the mammoth pyramids that we witness in Africa? For example, the great Zimbabwean remains of Thulamela. You go to, you refer to the mammoth Mapungube in Limpopo and also in Mpumalanga. We're talking about the ethno-mathematics that is embedded in games, ethno-games that we're playing. We're talking about the mural Ndebele shapes that you find them in the homes in Mpumalanga. We're talking about ethnobotany and ethnochemistry that assisted us to heal all kinds of illnesses that were there before our continent was colonized. So the point that I'm trying to make is knowledge has its roots, and then where it originates and then moves from the local or either rural to the global or universal. Maybe the questions that we need to ponder on for this public lecture is how can we locate a curriculum within the African knowledge systems? How do we begin to frame our own curriculum within the contestation of discursive practices of the global north? And then is there a knowledge system that is superior other than, over other ways of knowing? Is African knowledge systems a foundation that we could stand on? Or are we declaring that as Africa completely shattered herself in the contest of knowledge construction? This call for Africanization of the curriculum is undertaking and provide an alternative emancipatory pedagogic practice, meaning we need to trouble what we call these forms of hegemony in the intellectual space, whether we call it an intellectual colonization that was born out of imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, neoliberalism, and many other forms that are formations of dominion and marginalization. The argument that I'm trying to make, or the argument that we should pursue as African people, particularly institutions of higher education, is about mental emancipation. And then this mental emancipation should begin as a stepping stone towards the advancement of a transformation, empowerment, evolution towards a liberatory agenda in the post-apartheid colonial Africa. Our talk today will center around the breaking cycles of educational inequities, challenging of hegemony in knowledge construction and pedagogy. I also want to talk about, Africanization of the curriculum, or you call it Afrosense or decoloniality or decolonization. To say Africanization of the curriculum should be seen as a pedagogic tool located within the discourse of epistemic and ontological liberty or emancipation, which is not rigid but very fluid, is dynamic, is ever-changing, and then should be a contest, and then compete with other ways of knowing, and then understand this as multiplicity of praxis. Maybe I should, just provoke the audience by referring to Africanization. For me, it means a death of God. It means God is dead. He bled to death under our dagger. What does that mean? People with the orientation of the Christian theology will tell you about Trinity, which is God the Father, God the Spirit, and God the Holy Ghost. So when we talk about the death of God or God is dead, we are talking about immediately what comes to our mind is the resurrection, the renewal. So the question that we should be asking, if I'll have to pair and then compare the Africanization with the death of God, the question that we should be asking is, who will clean and then wipe this blood of us? And is there a water to cleanse ourselves? A point that I'm trying to make here is about enlightenment, it's about resurrection, it's about us rising and then rising from the decay. My understanding of Africanization of the curriculum is about restoration, it's about dignity, it's about revival of African epistemology. It's about moving from the periphery towards the center. It's bringing prominence, hope, resurgence, renaissance, enlightenment, resurrection, renewal, and revitalization. Africanization is about troubling the dominant discourses. And we know the dominant discourses that have been dominating the pyramids of knowledge comes from the global north. It is about neutralizing, diluting, dismantling hegemony in knowledge production that is attempted to kill other ways of knowing. Africanization or decoloniality or Afrosense or decolonization of the curriculum is about striking a balance on the pendulum in the pyramids of ways of knowing. Africanization is about pushing the emancipatory liberty agenda against the domination from the global north. It is about the confrontation and challenging claims about custodians, sole custodians of knowledge, because we have been prepared and then structured to say knowledge comes from the north, the global north. And these people pretend to be the sole custodians of knowledge. This process is about defining and redefining ourselves as Africans, as part and parcel of humanity and human race, but also demonstrating our significance, the impact that we can make in the knowledge construction and scholarship. We know that colonization and all these forms of dominion were constructed or has constructed an African as a racial being. Maybe we need to ask ourselves, what is the sociological, historical, political, ontological, and epistemic process that makes us Africans? That's the question that we should be asking ourselves. The ontological question can be tied to the epistemology, which is about ways of knowing. Our education system should allow us to reflect and define and redefine ourselves without singular identity. The point that I'm making is, even if we define ourselves as Africans, but we're not wearing or taking a non-essentialist perspective or position to say, us as Africans, we can be in the position to be boxed and then labeled as people with thick lips, kinky hairs, and then dark skin. But the stories about who we are is the stories that we can narrate ourselves, not being told by others. Our Africanness should not be fixed and then should not be cast in parameters of geo-social spaces in terms of the anatomy, which is about our making, or the geography, which is about the geo-spaces. The dominant discourse, let me amplify the issues of the dominant discourses, which is the dominant epistemic colonization, which stemming from the global North hegemony. To say all these formats and forms of domination, which I've highlighted, which is colonization, imperialism, apartheid, neocolonialism, neoliberalism, marginalization, all these forms and other forms of knowing, they refer to other forms of knowing as unscientific, as pathetic, as puzzling, and that also needs only the global North devices to cleanse them. Africanization is about the recognition of others and then knowing and amplifying others' voices without relegating them to the periphery. To Africanize, to decolonize, to Afrosense, to decoloniality, it is to create that critical mass of chorus of voices or chorus of narratives that will sustain and then critically be responsive to practices that are relevant to humanity and then informed by experiences and then also our context. Africanization, for me, should be understood as us taking the trouble and then reworking and then troubling, dismantling, challenging this hegemony that has been there. For deconstructing and then listening to those voices that are stuttering voices, unexpected dialects, misspeaking and unpredicted articulation that are capable of producing and remapping of ways of knowing. We know knowledge is a very contested terrain. All forms of domination, they have always claimed, or it's from the word go, from the beginning when they started moving to colonize different parts of the world. Their intention and the contest was over knowledge, it was over mind, intellect, and also pedagogic practice. Curriculum in our education institution, and African university in particular, should be grounded within the African communities and cultures. African universities have to be conscious of the African identity, the ways of teaching, which is pedagogic practices that are intertwined and interwoven within the fabric of African epistemological systems. And then it needs to also be conceptualized as a collective, communal, and not monopolized by individuals. Afrosense and this decolonization or Africanization should be magnified to amplify the richness of the collective communal learning spaces, shared experiences that is intertwined within the context of our everyday interaction. To call for Africanization, its intention is about demystifying the notion of sole custodians of knowledge, simplifies knowledge systems as complex and dynamic phenomenon that could or should not be arrested within the ownership of few individuals. Maybe if we talk about the African scholarship or Africanization, these are some of the issues that we should be highlighting. The first one is about rupturing the boundaries of knowledge. It's about decentering and then diluting power dominations. It's about rewriting institutional discursive practices. It's about grounding knowledge in African communities and traditions and cultures. It's about being conscious of African identities, the way we teach, and then how then do we make sure that we intertwine and then interwoven this into our own African culture. And then maybe magnify also and then validate our richness as people, as part of humanity or the human race. We should also offer to Africans as the world and also the world the knowledge, just as Harvard has done, just as Oxford has done, just as Edinburgh has done. These are the universities that has offered knowledge to the world. So even in the way we write, even the citation we make, we're referring to the Harvard-style citations, and then many others. Why can't we come up with our own citation practices as Africans? So Africans should position themselves as equal partners in the corpus of global knowledge. We should also provide a counter-discursive strategy rather than being rhetoric. We should draw the inspiration from our environment as indigenous trees are growing from the seed that is planted and then nurtured in the African soil. We need to bring forth the consciousness to our own comparative and competitive advantage on the global arena. We should also pursue knowledge construction that will contribute to the revolution of the socio-economic, intellectual emancipation and total emancipation of the human race. Maybe the last 2 points that I should also raise is this Africanization should not be arrested within the dichotomy of the discourses of the tradition versus the modern, or developing versus the developed, or global north versus the south, or rural versus the urban or peri-urban. It should be part of the new dialogue by setting national and global scientific agenda in knowledge construction. It is about claiming and reclaiming respect, places and spaces in participating as threat setters on the global stage. And then by way of concluding, maybe I should be asking these questions. These are the questions that I'm asking that I think will trigger and then also make us to think deep. The first question is, are we as African people or African institution maintaining ourselves as copies of the foreign systems? Are we representing the colonial powers and then cultures in the absence of the slave master? Are we as Africans or African institution reflecting the neoliberal, neo-imperialist with no roots in our own culture? Are we as Africans or African institutions assuming a role of being subjects rather than being the object of position in the periphery, or people who are demonstrating to move towards the center? Are we as African institution enhancing individualism, elitism, westernized mentality? Are we also imitating so-called the I world? So these are the kinds of, or the first world. These are the kinds of things that we should be thinking of. So this is my way of concluding. And then the very last question that we should also ponder around is, are we responding to the continental objectives, to the context or local context, and our own societal demands, so that our own curriculum should be relevant to the people that we're serving? Let me pause there and then thank everybody.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful lecture, and it weaved very well with how Professor Ramukhale started
Yes.
out with decolonizing the curriculum, and you went the Africanization of the curriculum, and that was very insightful. I picked up a few notes on the issues that you raised, but I'm going to give Prof. Ramukhale an opportunity to respond to some of the points that you have raised, and then we will conclude our interactions. Thank you.
Thanks.
And what I've been able to pick up in your lecture is a continuum that is true of the decolonization process. The whole process of decolonization and the Africanization of the curriculum is an imperative within the larger project of decolonization. And I've been able to, as you were presenting, I was able to see this continuum. The way this problem started is that when we got colonized, the colonizer, as you said, then started marginalizing other ways of knowing. And we were taught that what we know was unscientific.
Yes.
That it was primitive. And so we were intellectually colonized in that way. And you know, the Western knowledge system assumed a universal role for itself. That what we are saying as the West is universal. It's true for the whole world. Because they were going around, you know, basically wanting, conquering the world and wanting the whole world to reflect their own views on reality. And what then happened is that because we were so powerless, we tended to accept, you know, what we were taught, that we bring nothing to the table. You know, we have to hear from them. We have to learn from them. So there was that, from that marginalization, there was that phase of acceptance.
Yes.
And our forebears went to mission schools. They went to universities overseas and imbibed that Western knowledge, that Eurocentric knowledge. And that was part of the acceptance, because we wanted to be adopted by the colonizers, you know, to be accepted as people who were now civilized. But over time, we got into the phase of resistance, because I think what became apparent to our forebears was that it didn't matter how educated you were, you were still treated as an inferior. And so that's how the resistance phase got in, and from that resistance, the decolonization of Africa then began. And with the Africans now, having gained a voice, we entered the period of self-assertion. of self-empowerment, of restoration. You talk about restoration. Africans now having the confidence to say that we also have something to contribute, and that we have all this historical achievements which we can rely on to indicate that we were not in this long night of savagery, as Chunache put it, from which Europeans saved us.
Yes.
And so that became a phase. Now, which is what is happening now, even with the Africanization of the curriculum, to give young people the confidence that before Europe came to Africa, we had our own ways of knowledge, you know, our own ways of confronting reality, and that is now being restored. Now, what I liked about your lecture is that quite often, and this has always been my issue, is that when we talk about decolonization, we talk about Africanization, the temptation is just to stop there, to say now we have Africanized, we've achieved what you wanted to achieve. But what I liked about your lecture is that you went further to say that this Africanization project must then take us into the world as equals, so that we contribute to the totality of human knowledge. And we say, this is what we bring, you know, as Africans, which ties very nicely with the principle of globalization, that didactic principle. That start with the known, start with the local, and then you move out to the complex, to the global, because we are part of the human race. Human problems are the same all over the world, but we bring different experiences to solving those problems. So that's what I really liked about that perspective you brought in your lecture, that that integration with the totality of human knowledge is very important. And for me, that is being progressive. Yes. Because quite often, out of cultural pride and chauvinism, we get caught in the stage of Africanization, and we think once we've Africanized, that's sufficient, and we don't want to connect with the global world. So I really liked that perspective that you brought to the lecture. And it's as if you had read, my piece, because I could easily see connections. So that's what colleagues have been able to pick up from Professor Nkwane's lecture, and I'm sure all of us have learned something that we can take forward as we proceed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks to the two professors. I'm sure all of us have been enriched from this engagement today. I am sure, gentlemen, in one or two sentences from me, you will agree that the discourse on decolonization and Africanization converges back to one point, and that is the mind.
Yes.
And the mindset. If you have read Nguki's work on decolonizing the mind, the politics of African literature, you will see that the starting point in all of this is us winning the battle, that we have a space out there in our minds. You listen to Macron when he addresses the world, he speaks French. Yes. You will sort out your understanding of what he says. You listen to Putin, he talks Russian. You listen to Xi Jinping, he talks Chinese. You listen to African presidents, we English. So we can sort it out on our own, that it all comes back to, don't we think what we have is worth listening to and worth appreciating by the world. Thank you. That concludes our lecture.